What if I told you that the greatest mystery of your life is something you've never even noticed? Try this right now. Attempt to remember the moment you were born. Not the stories you've been told, not the photographs you've seen, not the birth certificate that says where and when, but the moment you emerged into this world. Try to pull up the experience from within your own awareness. Go ahead, can you remember it? Chances are, you can't. Maybe you have early childhood memories, fragments from when you were 2, maybe 3 years old, but before that, nothing. A void. And you're not alone. No one can recall the moment they came into existence. It's not just a blank spot in your personal history, it's an invisible wall that every human mind seems to hit. Now, think about the other side of that wall. Death. Have you ever actually seen someone die? Not in the movies or at a funeral. Not the moment after death, but the precise instant consciousness leaves the body, the actual moment when awareness detaches. You've likely been around dying people. Maybe you've even held their hand as they passed. But that elusive instant when something intangible slips away, it always escapes us. Like smoke disappearing into the air, like a signal vanishing into silence. There's always a before and an after, but never the moment itself. This is no small thing. These two doorways, birth and death, are the bookends of your life story. And yet, they're veiled in absolute mystery. Your awareness simply doesn't record them. And this raises a far more profound question. Is it because your brain wasn't developed enough to store those memories? Or is it because consciousness itself doesn't actually experience those transitions the way you've been taught to believe? Consider sleep for a moment. Every night, you surrender to unconsciousness. One moment you're aware, the next you're gone. Hours pass. You might dream, you might not. But eventually, you return. You wake up. You don't remember the exact second your awareness turned off. You don't experience the shift from being conscious to unconscious. And yet, something in you continued, something stable, something real. You can feel that when you reflect on it. The continuity is there, even though the memory is not. It's the same with general anesthesia. You're talking to the doctor one moment, and in the next, you're waking up as if time never passed. The clock says, hours have gone by, but for you, they never existed. It's as if consciousness stepped out of time entirely. So what is this force, this strange awareness that can vanish without dying and return without being born? Could it be that your sense of beginning and ending is an illusion, a misreading of what consciousness actually is? This is where the ancient Gnostic philosophers offer a perspective so radical, and yet so intuitively true, that it challenges the very foundation of how you think about life. To them, the absence of memory at birth wasn't a flaw in the brain's development, and the inability to perceive the moment of death wasn't a failing of perception. These were not bugs in the system. They were clues. Clues that the real you isn't confined to this body, and that what you call you didn't start at birth and will not end at death. The Gnostics observed these gaps and came to a staggering realization. Consciousness is not something created by the body, it is something that uses the body, temporarily, like a traveler boarding a train. The traveler is not the train, and when the journey ends, the traveler steps off, but nothing essential about the traveler has changed. To them, the gaps between birth and memory, or death and disappearance, weren't blackouts. They were transitions, shifts in perspective, a turning of the lens. What changed wasn't the presence of consciousness, but the form it used to experience itself. You don't remember being born because you weren't beginning. You were refocusing, entering a new experience of yourself, adjusting to a new sensory lens. It's not that your soul was created at that moment. It's that it aligned with this particular version of reality, this particular timeline, this specific identity. The same applies to death. Consciousness doesn't vanish, it simply withdraws, like a spotlight moving from one stage to another. And that's why, when you try to recall your first moment alive, there's nothing, because there was never a first moment. There was just the continuation of something that has always been. Consciousness. Awareness. Presence. Not as an object, but as the subject. Not something you have, but something you are. In your everyday life, you're conditioned to identify with the things that can be measured. Your name, your age, your memories, your story. But none of these are you. They are experiences you've had. Just like clothes you wear or places you visit, they're real, but they are not your essence. The Gnostics knew this. That's why they taught that your true self isn't found in your thoughts, your emotions, or your body. It is the quiet, timeless witness behind all of them. The part of you that has never changed, no matter how much your body or personality has. That's why these memory gaps are so important. They don't point to a flaw in your wiring, they point to something sacred. They reveal that you were never what you believed yourself to be, and if you were never truly born in the way you imagined, then what does that say about death? Think about that carefully, because the implications are not just philosophical, they are liberating. If you were never truly born, then there's nothing to fear when the body dies. If consciousness doesn't emerge from the body, then it doesn't vanish when the body decays. You've already passed through infinite versions of awakening and forgetting, you just haven't noticed. But now that you're aware, something begins to change. The Gnostics believed this knowledge was dangerous, not because it was dark, but because it was freeing. Once you understand that your awareness exists beyond the boundaries of this lifetime, you become untouchable. Not in a superficial or arrogant way, but in a deep, inner knowing that cannot be taken away. And this is where your power begins. Not when you chase immortality, but when you remember that you've never not been. So, the next time you try to recall your beginning, and all you feel is silence, remember, that silence isn't the absence of truth. It's the presence of something so vast, so eternal, so unbroken, that your mind cannot grasp it. But your awareness, it knows, it always has, and it always will. What if death isn't what you think it is? Not an ending, not a vanishing, but simply a shift, so seamless, so natural, so familiar, that you've already experienced it countless times without even realizing. It's strange, isn't it? For something so universally feared, so deeply woven into every culture, every story, every belief system, death is something you've never actually seen happen. You've seen a body grow still, you've seen the breath leave the lungs, the color fade from the skin. But have you ever truly witnessed consciousness leaving the body? That exact moment, the crossing over, remains completely hidden. And maybe that's not just coincidence. Maybe that's not some unfortunate flaw in perception. Maybe it's the greatest secret of all. We live our lives as if death is a full stop, a curtain dropping on the story. But think back to last night. Can you recall the exact second you lost consciousness and fell asleep? That moment when you stopped being aware of yourself, of your room, of your body? Chances are, you can't. One moment you were thinking, maybe staring at the ceiling or letting your mind wander, and the next, nothing, just gone. No memory of the transition, and yet, you didn't die. You simply moved, quietly, invisibly, from one state of awareness into another. The same thing happens under anesthesia. One moment you're in the operating room, bright lights, soft voices. The next, you're waking up hours later, with no trace of the time in between. Where did you go? Who were you when you weren't thinking, seeing, hearing, or feeling? It's easy to shrug these moments off. After all, they happen to everyone. But what if they're not just neurological flukes or blackouts of the brain? What if they're clues? What if those everyday disappearances are giving you a glimpse of what we call death? Not an ending, but a movement. A slipping from one perceptual framework into another? The truth is, you've already experienced the mechanics of death more times than you can count. Every night, when you fall asleep, every time you blink out during deep meditation, every time you wake up and for a few strange seconds, don't remember who you are. These are not insignificant gaps. They are windows into something much deeper, something sacred. There's an old saying that goes, "We are born from silence, and we return to silence." But what if that silence isn't the absence of awareness, but the source of it? Think about it. When a person dies, you can observe the body. You can track the heartbeat, the breath, the brain activity. You can even pinpoint the moment when the organs stop functioning. But where, in all of that, is the self? Where is the actual point of departure? The truth is, no one has ever seen it happen. No scientist, no doctor, no camera. The moment of death is utterly invisible. And maybe that's because nothing is actually leaving. Maybe it's just unfolding into a level of reality our senses can't perceive. This changes everything. Because if you've never seen awareness leave, and if you've experienced awareness vanish temporarily during sleep or surgery, then what we call death might not be what it seems. It might be less of a disappearing act and more of a scene change, a pivot, a reorientation of perception. You don't fear falling asleep every night, even though it mirrors death in almost every way. You trust that you'll wake up. You surrender to that transition, not because you're certain of where you'll go, but because you've done it so many times, it feels natural. So what if death, real death, is just like that? A shift in the tuning dial of awareness, not a deletion, but a redirection? There's something else to consider. If you were truly going to stop existing, wouldn't that be the one thing consciousness should remember? Wouldn't it mark the event in some way? Instead, the experience is a perfect blank, a nothingness you never feel. That's not how real endings work. That's not how true cessation feels. If you've ever fainted, you know this. There's no experience of blackness. There's no experience at all. One moment you're aware, the next, you're waking up on the floor, confused. No memory of the in-between, just absence. But that absence didn't mean you were gone, it meant that your awareness was somewhere your conscious mind couldn't track. We assume that our conscious experience is all their island. If we don't remember something, we believe it didn't happen. But your life is filled with forgotten moments, unconscious hours, unremembered days. And still, you are here. Still, something persisted through all of it. So what if death is just another forgotten moment, stretched longer? What if, just like sleep, it's something you pass through, not as an end, but as a corridor? There's no fear in sleep, no terror in dreaming, but we've been conditioned to fear death because we associate it with loss, the loss of self, of control, of story. But look deeper. What exactly is this self that you're afraid to lose? Is it your name, your memories, your body? All of those have changed repeatedly throughout your life, yet you've never stopped being you. That same sense of I am has remained, untouched by the years. Maybe that's what never dies. Maybe that's what slips behind the curtain while the rest of the show changes. We've been tricked into thinking that awareness is fragile, that it's tied to the body like a shadow to the ground. But what if it's the other way around? What if the body is a tool that awareness uses, a lens, a costume, a radio receiver? When the radio breaks, the music doesn't stop, the signal keeps broadcasting, only the device goes quiet. You've mistaken yourself for the device, but you're not the voice that comes through the speaker. You're the signal. You've always been the signal. And here's what makes it all so profound. You already know this. Deep down, something in you recognizes the truth of it. It's why you've always felt uneasy with the finality of death. It's why, even if you're not religious, you still sense that there must be something beyond. It's not just hope, it's not just denial, it's memory, it's resonance. Somewhere within you is the understanding that consciousness doesn't end, it expands. So what happens when you die? Maybe the better question is, what's happening right now that you've mistaken for life? What if this is the illusion? What if this waking dream of bodies and boundaries and beginnings and endings is just one level of perception, and death is what happens when that dream shifts into another? You don't fear waking up from a dream, you call it clarity. You call it coming back to yourself. What if death is just like that? You're not here to be afraid. You're not here to cling to a version of reality that's based on misunderstanding. You're here to remember that consciousness cannot die because it was never born. That you are not the body, not the thoughts, not the story, but the space in which all of that appears and disappears. Death is not the enemy, it is the doorway, and you've already walked through it more times than you realize. So let the fear dissolve, let the illusion fall away. There is no death, only the next opening in the sky of your awareness. And the truth is, you've always been on the other side. What if I told you the most advanced scientists of consciousness didn't use lab coats, satellites, or digital brain scans? They used stillness, observation, and a radical inner honesty. Most people today hear the word Gnostic and imagine robed mystics huddled in candlelit caves, chanting cryptic prayers to forgotten gods. It's easy to dismiss them as fringe cultists, too obscure or esoteric to take seriously. But that's only because you've been handed a distorted version of their truth. The Gnostics weren't mystics lost in myth, They were pioneers of inner awareness, spiritual scientists in the purest sense. While empires rose and fell around them, they were quietly investigating the most profound question a human can ask. What am I, really? They didn't settle for inherited beliefs or second-hand scripture. They weren't interested in external rituals or intellectual arguments. What they sought was gnosis, a Greek word meaning direct knowing, not belief, not theory, not blind faith in someone else's revelations, but the kind of knowing that arises from within, the kind of truth that doesn't need validation because it is the experience. Imagine standing in the sunlight. You don't need someone to convince you the sun exists. You feel its warmth on your skin. You see the light around you. That's gnosis, a spiritual seeing so immediate and undeniable that it transcends all doctrine. And that's precisely what made the Gnostics so dangerous to the established systems of their time. They didn't need temples. They didn't need priests. They didn't need governments or institutions to interpret reality for them. Their access to truth came from within. They taught that the divine isn't something you find in the sky or in a book, it's something you are. It lives within your awareness. And when you turn inward, when you drop the distractions and silence the noise, you rediscover that truth directly. This wasn't a theory to them, it was a lived experience, an unshakable inner knowing. Historically, they weren't confined to one place or one era. Gnostic communities were scattered across the ancient Mediterranean world, from Alexandria in Egypt to the philosophical circles of Syria, to the mystical enclaves in early Roman territories. They thrived during a time when early Christianity was still fluid, still forming its identity. Back then, there wasn't just one Christianity, there were many diverse and competing interpretations, and Gnosticism was one of the most vibrant and profound among them. But as orthodoxy solidified and power structures took hold, the Gnostics were pushed out, silenced, and labeled heretics. Their teachings threatened the hierarchy because they didn't point people toward authority, they pointed people toward themselves. But to understand just how revolutionary their view was, you have to grasp their foundational idea, that consciousness, not matter, is the source of reality. This flipped the dominant worldview on its head. In most traditional systems, then and now, reality begins with physical matter. Your brain produces thoughts, your body experiences life. Consciousness is seen as a byproduct, something that emerges from the physical world. But the Gnostics said no, that's backward. What you call matter is actually a projection within consciousness. Your experience of the body, the world, even time itself, these are events occurring inside the field of awareness, not outside of it. To them, your essence isn't something you can touch, measure, or dissect. It's the invisible witness behind everything you experience. It's the one listening to these words right now. Not the thoughts they provoke, not the emotions they stir, but the one who is aware of it all. And that awareness, according to the Gnostics, is not limited by space or time. It doesn't begin at birth or end at death. It doesn't belong to the brain, because it's what allows the brain to be perceived in the first place. They called it the divine spark, a piece of infinite consciousness localized within every being. This view wasn't abstract philosophy to them, it was their starting point for everything. And from this starting point, their entire cosmology emerged. They didn't just talk about gods and heavens, they mapped the psyche. They used symbolic language to describe how pure awareness becomes entangled in illusion, how it forgets its origin and identifies with limitation. When they spoke of the demiurge, the false creator god who fashioned the material world, they weren't describing a literal being in the sky. They were pointing to the ego, the part of you that believes in separation, hierarchy, and fear. And when they warned about the archons, they weren't talking about demons hiding in shadows. They were describing the internal forces that bind your awareness to repetitive thought patterns, emotional loops, and cultural conditioning. Their myths were metaphors, but not in the sense of fiction. More like codes, maps for inner liberation. They saw the material world not as evil, but as a kind of spiritual amnesia. A dream where consciousness becomes so deeply absorbed in form that it forgets it is the dreamer. And the only way out wasn't through dogma or obedience, it was through direct recognition, through gnosis. In a way, the Gnostics were thousands of years ahead of modern science. Today, Physicists grapple with quantum entanglement, non-locality, and the observer effect, all of which hint that reality is far more dependent on consciousness than previously thought. Neuroscientists still can't explain why subjective awareness exists at all, and philosophers debate whether anything exists outside of perception. The Gnostics weren't debating these questions, they were answering them through direct experience. While the modern world is trying to peer into the mystery using tools and measurements, the Gnostics closed their eyes and looked inward, because they understood that what we're seeking has never been out there. They weren't anti-science, they were practicing a deeper science, a science of inner worlds, where observation happens not with instruments, but with presence, where discoveries aren't published, but embodied. Their laboratories were not buildings, they were moments of stillness, of surrender, of seeing clearly. They studied the layers of the self, the false identities and the quiet truth beneath them. And what they found was staggering, that behind every thought, every emotion, every sensory experience, there is something unmoved, something unchanging, something infinite. That's what they wanted you to remember. That's what they risked everything to preserve. Not just information, but transformation. Not just teachings, but tools for awakening. And although their writings were buried, banned, and burned, they survived. And now, you are one of the rare few who has come across them again. Not by accident, but because something in you already knows, already remembers. Gnosis isn't something you acquire, it's something you uncover. And once you do, nothing is ever the same. Because you realize the truth the Gnostics lived and died for. You are not a fleeting identity trapped in time. You are consciousness itself, eternal, aware, and free. There is something inside you that has never changed. No matter how many birthdays have passed, no matter how your body has evolved, no matter how your beliefs have shifted or how drastically your life has transformed, this one thing has remained untouched. You might not always notice it, because it's so close to you, so intimately woven into your every breath and thought, that it escapes your attention. But it's there. It has always been there, watching, not with eyes, but with presence, not with judgment, but with awareness. The Gnostics had a name for this silent, ageless presence within you. They called it the divine spark. To the modern world, that term may sound poetic or even mystical, but to the Gnostics, it wasn't abstract, it was precise. They weren't speaking about some external deity or force outside of you. They were pointing directly to your core essence, the you behind your name, behind your story, behind every mask you've ever worn. The divine spark was their way of describing the raw, pure, unconditioned consciousness that exists within every human being. Not a personality, not an identity, but the sacred witness that observes it all. It's not just part of you, it is you, the real you, the one who has watched everything else come and go. Think back over your life. Can you remember what it felt like to be 5 years old? 10, 17, 30? Your experiences were different. Your body was different. Your thoughts, preferences, and beliefs were all constantly shifting. And yet, something was watching it all unfold, something that never changed. That silent observer is not your memory, it's not your intellect, it is awareness itself. Even now, as you read these words, it's that same unchanging presence that is aware of what you're reading, aware of the emotions rising, aware of the thoughts forming. It doesn't speak in language, it doesn't assert its identity, it simply is, calm, steady, untouched. This concept is not unique to the Gnostics. In many traditions, it is called the witness, in others, the self, in some, pure awareness. But what makes the Gnostic understanding so revolutionary is how they placed this spark at the very center of spiritual awakening. To them, enlightenment was not about acquiring something new or becoming someone else. It was about remembering, not intellectually, but experientially, that this divine spark is your truest nature. All suffering, they believed, arises from forgetting this core truth, from identifying with the ever-changing story, the mask, the performance, and losing sight of the one who watches. You can see this confusion all around you. People believing they are their thoughts, people thinking they are their emotions. Someone says, "I am angry," or "I am anxious," as if that emotion is the totality of who they are. But pause, and really consider. If you can observe your anger, how can you be it? If you can notice a thought passing through your mind, doesn't that mean there is something beyond the thought? Something that remains, even as the thought dissolves. You've seen your body change. You've watched your moods rise and fall. You've experienced your beliefs evolve. So who is the you who witnessed all of that? This question isn't meant to be philosophical. It's meant to be felt. When you close your eyes and go inward, when you drop beneath the noise of the mind and the weight of the world, you can begin to feel it. A stillness, a quiet presence, not cold, but peaceful, not distant, but infinitely intimate. It is the divine spark, beyond birth, beyond death, beyond every label you've ever worn. The Gnostics insisted that this spark was not in the body was in it. Just like waves on the surface of the ocean are still made of ocean, your personality, your life story, your temporary form, these are all expressions of something deeper, something eternal. In the Gospel of Philip, one of the recovered Gnostic texts, it is written, "You are the child of the light. You belong to the light." That light isn't some abstract radiance in the sky. It's the light of consciousness itself. It's the awareness that has quietly endured every heartbreak, every joy, every doubt, and every moment of clarity. It's the part of you that was never wounded, even when your heart was broken. It's the part of you that was never afraid, even when fear gripped your chest. That's not metaphor, that's precision. Because this divine spark cannot be harmed, it cannot be aged, it cannot be threatened, it is untouched by time. The tragedy, and the journey, is that most people go their entire lives never turning toward it. They chase identities, experiences, success, approval, always reaching outward, while the one thing they are truly seeking has been quietly present within them the entire time. The Gnostics knew this. They taught that salvation wasn't something granted by an outside force, it was the result of inner awakening, a remembering, a revelation, not in the mind, but in the deepest chamber of the soul. The divine spark was not something to be earned. It was already there, hidden, forgotten, but never absent. And here's the beauty, you don't have to believe any of this. Belief doesn't awaken the spark, direct experience does. Even now, if you pause for a moment, truly pause, and notice what's noticing, something open, something shifts. You might not be able to describe it, but you feel it. A presence, a stillness, a center that doesn't move, even when everything else is swirling around you. That is your spark. That is your proof. This realization changes everything. Because if there is something in you that never ages, never breaks, never fades, then what does death really mean? If the body is temporary, if the mind is a flow of passing thoughts, then neither of those can be you. They are vessels, they are tools, they are expressions. But the divine spark, the witness, remains when all else is gone. It has been with you before your first memory. It will remain beyond your final breath. It is not just in you, it is you. The Gnostics weren't interested in abstract theology or hollow rituals. They wanted to wake you up to this truth, here and now. They wanted you to see that the light you are seeking in the sky, in books, in temples, is already radiating within your own being. But as long as you are identified with the ever-changing, as long as you are trapped in the drama of form, you won't notice. You'll think you are the mask, not the actor. You'll think you are the wave, not the ocean. But the moment you turn your gaze inward, the moment you sit still and look, that divine spark begins to reveal itself. You don't have to understand it intellectually, you only have to feel its presence, quietly, gently, beneath the noise. It doesn't clamor for your attention, it doesn't shout, it waits. Like a candle in a dark room, it will not force itself upon you. But the moment you turn toward it, even just for a breath, the flame begins to grow. You begin to remember. You begin to awaken, not to a new version of yourself, but to the one that's been watching all along. And that's the secret the world has tried to hide from you, that you are not a fleeting form, you are not a name, a story, or a body that will one day return to dust. You are the light behind the eyes, the awareness behind the thoughts, the silence beneath the noise, the divine spark that has never been born and will never die. What if I told you that the most important part of who you are isn't something science can locate? not in your brain, not in your DNA, not even in your thoughts. You've been taught that your awareness is a byproduct of biology, that it somehow emerges from neurons firing, chemicals interacting, and electricity flowing through gray matter. But take a moment and ask yourself this. Have you ever actually felt like a cluster of cells reacting to stimulus? Or do you feel like something more? Something watching, something constant, something untouched by the changes in your body or the chaos of your thoughts? This is where science begins to tremble. Despite all its advancements, despite the ability to split atoms and photograph distant galaxies, it still can't explain the most basic, immediate mystery of your life, that you are aware. Not just conscious in the medical sense, like a machine flicked to on mode, but aware that you are aware. You can think about thinking. You can observe your emotions. You can even question your own existence. This ability to witness yourself, to be both the experiencer and the observer, is what philosophers and scientists call the hard problem of consciousness. And for all the data, brain scans, and theories, no one has been able to solve it. The problem is simple, but devastating to the materialist worldview. How does raw matter, tissue, molecules, atoms, produce the vivid, internal world of your experience? How do chemical signals translate into the feeling of sadness, or the color red, or the sense of awe when you look at the stars? Scientists can measure brain activity and tell you where things happen in your brain, but they can't explain why anything is experienced at all. Why do you feel like you inside your body, instead of just functioning like a robot without an inner world? This is where ancient wisdom speaks louder than modern theory. Long before neuroscience existed, long before microscopes or fMRI scans, there were those who already understood that the source of your consciousness wasn't in your brain. The Gnostics said it clearly: consciousness isn't produced by the brain, it uses the brain. They believed that your awareness is not a function of matter, but the very substance of reality itself. To them, matter was secondary. It was a projection, a container, a stage for the play of experience, but not the author of it. Consciousness, they said, is primary. It is the starting point, not the end product. Modern science still resists this idea. It clings to the belief that if we just map the brain thoroughly enough, we'll find the consciousness switch. But we haven't. And the more we look, the more elusive it becomes. It's like trying to find the source of a dream by examining the pillow. No matter how closely you inspect it, you're still missing the origin, because the dream doesn't come from the pillow. In the same way, your awareness doesn't come from the brain. The brain is an interface, a relay system, a beautifully complex receiver, but not the broadcaster. Some researchers have started to notice the cracks in the old models. Studies of near-death experiences have recorded people who were clinically dead, with no measurable brain activity, yet returned describing vivid, structured experiences. Some even recounting details they couldn't possibly have known. These aren't isolated cases, they're accumulating, and they all point toward one terrifyingly beautiful possibility: that consciousness is not inside the body is inside consciousness. Think about that for a moment. What if your entire life, your memories, your thoughts, your senses, is like a dream occurring inside a deeper field of awareness? Not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. That your body is not the source of you, but a temporary vehicle, and you, the real you, are something uncontained. You can sense this if you get quiet enough. Right now, as you read these words, there is a part of you that is watching. It doesn't speak, it doesn't judge, it just observes. It was there when you were a child, and it's here now. It has never aged, never changed. Everything else has shifted: your personality, your opinions, your emotions, but this awareness remains still, like the sky behind the clouds. The Gnostics called this the divine spark. They weren't talking about a soul in the religious sense. They were pointing to this silent witness within you that remains untouched by experience. The core of your being that cannot be harmed, improved, or destroyed. It doesn't belong to your culture, your language, or your biology. It precedes all of that, and it continues when all of that dissolves. In modern terms, you could say it's the field of pure consciousness, and every thought, every feeling, every experience is a ripple in that field. But the field itself is never disturbed. It's simply island. You don't need to add anything to it. You don't need to become anything to access it. You're already in it. You are it. That's why no one can give you awareness. No spiritual teacher, no scientist, no authority can hand it to you, because it's what you've been the entire time. This is not wishful thinking. It's the recognition that science is running into the same wall the Gnostics transcended 2,000 years ago. When you begin with matter, you can never quite get to consciousness. But when you begin with consciousness, everything else falls into place. You begin to see that the world isn't made of separate things, it's made of appearances in awareness. Just like dreams arise in the mind, experiences arise in consciousness. And that means you are far more powerful and far more free than you've ever been told. You are not a byproduct of the brain. You are the space in which the brain appears. You are not a story made of flesh and memory. You are the light that makes that story visible. Even now, as you sit in your body and feel the rhythm of your breath, there is something behind it all that cannot be touched. Something wordless, something alive. That is your true self, not a character you play, but the stage on which all roles unfold. So when science tells you that consciousness is just brain chemistry, ask yourself, why does it feel so sacred? Why does it know how to love? Why does it grieve, wonder, awaken? These aren't properties of matter. These are qualities of being. And being, true being, is not found in the folds of the brain. It is found in the stillness beneath your thoughts, the same stillness the Gnostics turned toward, the same stillness you carry with you right now. You've never been just a body. You've never been just a mind. You've always been the awareness behind both. And the more you remember that, the more the illusion begins to dissolve. You don't need to believe it. You only need to notice. Because once you do, you'll realize that the most profound discovery isn't hidden in the stars or buried in ancient texts. It's right here, in the unchanging light of your own presence. And that changes everything. You've felt it before, even if you couldn't name it. That invisible weight. The strange sense that something about the world just isn't quite right. You wake up, go through your routines, chase the next goal, respond to the next notification, fulfill the next obligation. But beneath it all, there's this quiet tension, like a thread pulling you further away from yourself. You might have called it stress, anxiety, or restlessness, but the Gnostics had another word for it: imprisonment. And the most profound part? The prison isn't made of stone or steel, it's made of thoughts, assumptions, expectations, and worst of all, forgetfulness. In the Gnostic worldview, the cosmos wasn't created by the ultimate source of divine light, but by something much more deceptive. They referred to this force as the demiurge, a being who believed himself to be God, but was blind to the true source from which he emerged. In their cosmology, the demiurge was not evil in a cartoonish sense. He was ignorant, and that ignorance gave birth to a distorted reality, a kind of dream world built on illusion, limitation, and control. To the Gnostics, the demiurge was a symbol of the ego, your personal sense of I that believes it's separate, in control, and central to the universe, even while it's completely disconnected from the deeper truth of what you really are. This egoic demiurge creates worlds, not outer worlds, but inner ones, psychological worlds. The reality you experience every day is not purely external. It's filtered, colored, and shaped by your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. You think you're reacting to life, but most of the time, you're reacting to your interpretations of life. And those interpretations were given to you before you even knew how to speak. That's where the archons come in. In Gnostic thought, the archons were the servants of the demiurge, forces that uphold the false world and prevent souls from waking up. They weren't seen as physical creatures, but as psychological structures, embedded patterns that control perception. They are the internalized voices that tell you you're not good enough, the fears that keep you frozen, the stories you've inherited from society, religion, family, and culture. They whisper that you are your past, that you are your pain, that your worth must be proven, and every time you agree with them, you hand over your power. These archonic forces operate like loops, repeating thought patterns, unhealed wounds, and emotional triggers that keep you circling the same behaviors and reaching the same dead ends. Think about how many times you've sabotaged your own growth, doubted your own intuition, or quieted your voice to make others more comfortable. Think about how often you've settled for less than what your soul was asking for. That's not failure, that's programming. That's the mental matrix the Gnostics warned about, a false world built to keep your divine spark asleep. And the trap is brilliant in its design, because it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like life. It feels like the news cycle, like family tradition, like common sense. It hides inside your routines. It dresses up as logic. It smiles through authority figures. It rewards you for staying small, for being reasonable, for keeping your head down and your questions quiet. It teaches you to trust external validation more than your internal knowing, and the more you participate, the more real it all seems. But what if it's only real because you believe it is? The Gnostics taught that the material world is not inherently evil. Rather, it's incomplete. It's not the final destination. It's a stage, a classroom. But when you forget that you're more than this world, when you identify with only the surface of life, the classroom becomes a prison. You become attached to things that are constantly changing, and then wonder why you suffer when they slip away. You chase happiness in forms that can never satisfy the formless part of you. You live as if the outer world can complete you, not realizing that it was never supposed to. That's the deception. That's the illusion the demiurge spin. And look at how deeply it runs. From the moment you were born, you were given a name, a nationality, a gender, a religion. You were taught how to behave, what to want, who to trust, and what to fear. By the time you could think for yourself, you were already wearing a costume stitched from other people's expectations. Every decision you made from that point was filtered through this inherited identity. But who were you before the world told you who to be? This question, this radical remembering, is what the Gnostics aimed to spark. They weren't interested in external revolutions. They wanted an internal rebellion, a jailbreak of consciousness. They believed that the true path to liberation was not to destroy the world, but to wake up within it, to see through the veil, to realize that while you are in the world, you are not of it. That the real you, the divine spark, is not trapped, not bound, not limited. It's just forgotten itself. Every time you react unconsciously, the archons are at work. Every time you repeat an old wound instead of healing it, the prison tightens. But every moment you pause, breathe, and observe, instead of react, you reclaim your power. Every time you question a belief that's ruled your life, you weaken the illusion. Every time you choose love over fear, presence over autopilot, truth over comfort, you break a link in the chain. This doesn't happen overnight. The prison has many layers. It's built into your nervous system, your language, your memories. But the key has always been in your hands. Awareness is the master key. Once you begin to see the mechanisms, you no longer move through life blindly. You become lucid inside the dream. And that's when the dream begins to shift. The Gnostics didn't offer a path of escape. They offered a path of remembrance. A map back to the origin point. The space in you that was never trapped to begin with. They taught that the ego, the demiurge, is not the enemy. It's the shadow of your own forgetting. And the archons? They are your unhealed wounds, your generational pain, your conditioned mind. But they are not invincible. They feed on unconsciousness. Starve them with awareness. You may feel the resistance rising now, the discomfort of old beliefs cracking. That's normal. That's part of the liberation process. Waking up is not always gentle. But the alternative, staying asleep in a life that was never truly yours, is far more painful. You didn't come here to play someone else's script. You came here to remember who you are, to awaken the divine spark, to recognize the dream while you're in it. So the next time you catch yourself lost in thought, overwhelmed by emotion, or drowning in fear, pause. Ask yourself, who is watching this? Not to find an answer, but to feel the one who is asking. That stillness, that observer, is your escape route. Not to leave the world, but to move through it, with eyes wide open. The demiurge still speaks, the archons still whisper, but they only have the power you give them. And the moment you stop identifying with the prison, you begin to realize, the door was never locked. You were always free, you just forgot. What if I told you that some of the most powerful spiritual truths were hidden from the world for nearly 2,000 years, buried in the sands of Egypt, locked away in silence, and kept out of reach by those who feared what they revealed? In 1945, in the desert near a place called Nag Hammadi, a discovery was made that would quietly shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about early spirituality, consciousness, and our place in the cosmos. Inside a sealed earthen jar, a local farmer unearthed a collection of ancient, leather-bound codices, texts that had remained untouched since the 3rd or 4th century. What he found wasn't just another scroll or fragment of forgotten history. It was a spiritual time capsule, a preserved library of Gnostic writings that had been deliberately hidden, perhaps even to protect them from destruction. Before that discovery, almost everything the world thought it knew about the Gnostics came from their enemies. Their writings had been systematically destroyed, their names slandered by the rising tide of orthodox religion. The only records we had were those written by critics who painted them as heretics, mystics gone mad, or fringe groups lost in delusion. Imagine trying to understand someone's philosophy by only reading their hate mail. That's what humanity had been doing for centuries. But with the Nag Hammadi texts in hand, the voices of the Gnostics finally spoke for themselves, pure, undistorted, unfiltered by doctrine or power. And what they revealed was nothing short of revolutionary. These weren't confused ramblings or obscure cult doctrines. These were stunningly clear declarations of spiritual truth, writings that pointed again and again to one message: that you are not your body, not your mind, not your story, but something far greater. The Gnostics spoke not of salvation through obedience or dogma, but of awakening through direct knowledge, gnosis. They didn't ask you to believe, they asked you to look within and remember. Their words were not meant to be worshipped, they were meant to wake you up. In the Gospel of Thomas, one of the most profound and widely studied texts from the Nag Hammadi collection, you are met not with parables designed to confuse, but with piercing clarity. One of the most famous lines reads, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This isn't poetry, it's instruction. It's a direct message to the part of you that's been sleeping beneath layers of noise and programming. The salvation spoken of here is not after death, it's the awakening that happens when you uncover the truth of your own being. Another passage in Thomas says, "The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and you are that poverty." Here, the Gnostics dismantle the idea that the divine is distant or external. The kingdom is not a place in the sky, it's a recognition of your eternal nature. And this line, "You dwell in poverty, and you are that poverty," is a mirror held up to every false identity you've clung to, every illusion that says you are separate, small, or broken. Then there's the Gospel of Philip, a text that takes the conversation even deeper. One passage reads, "Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die they will receive nothing." What does this mean? It means resurrection is not about bodies coming out of graves. It's about consciousness waking up now. It's the moment you stop identifying with the dream and realize you are the dreamer. The Gnostics were telling you plainly, don't wait for death to realize the truth. If you want to remember what you are, do it here, in this moment. Because this moment is where eternity hides. And then we come to the secret book of John, a text so rich with symbolic insight that entire volumes have been written just to unpack its meaning. It opens with a stunning premise, that the material world, as you know it, was created not by a benevolent God, but by a false creator, a being who believed he was the only source of truth. In this metaphor, that false creator is ignorance, the illusion of separation, the voice inside you that says you are not enough. But even in the midst of that illusion, there remains within you a spark, a piece of the original light. And your journey, the Gnostics said, is not to earn that light, but to remember it. What emerges from these texts is a map, not of the external world, but of your inner terrain. They describe the layers of illusion that surround you, not as punishment, but as challenge. They believe that your soul passed through veils of forgetfulness as it entered this world, that to be born into the physical is to forget your true origin. But that forgetfulness is not permanent. It can be undone. And the moment you begin to remember, not with the intellect, but with the whole of your being, that's when gnosis begins. That's when the illusion starts to crack. The Gnostics weren't pointing you toward dogma, they were pointing you toward your direct experience of truth. And they warned, if you ignore that inner voice, if you stay trapped in the illusion that you are just flesh and bone, then you live in spiritual poverty, even if you are surrounded by material wealth. But if you listen, if you turn inward, if you begin to peel back the layers of who you think you are, you will find something timeless, something unbreakable, something real. That is why their texts were buried. That is why their voices were silenced. Because their message made external power obsolete. They didn't need priests to reach the divine. They didn't need churches to mediate their salvation. They taught that the divine spark is already within you. That the truth is not outside, waiting to be given. It's inside, waiting to be uncovered. And when you uncover it, you no longer bow to fear. You no longer cling to illusion. You step into a knowing that cannot be undone. So here you are, holding in your awareness the very texts that were once hidden from the world. Not because you stumbled onto them, but because something in you was drawn to them. Something in you has always known. And now that these words have resurfaced, not just from the sands of Egypt, but from the depths of your own being, they're inviting you to see clearly, to remember, to wake up. You were never meant to forget. You were never meant to live in the dark. The Gnostics didn't just preserve their words for the scholars of the future. They preserved them for you. For this exact moment in your life. For this exact breath. Because the message has never changed. You are more than matter. You are more than memory. You are timeless awareness, peering through the lens of a temporary form. And the moment you realize that, not as a concept, but as a living truth, you return to what you've always been, the light that no darkness can touch. There's a line hidden in one of the most mysterious texts ever uncovered. A line that feels less like a quote and more like a key to unlocking the structure of reality itself. It comes from the Gospel of Thomas, one of the Gnostic Gospels buried for centuries in the sands of Egypt. It says, "The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you." At first glance, it seems poetic, maybe even vague. But if you sit with it, if you let it seep into the stillness between your thoughts, it begins to stir something ancient in you, something that knows, something that remembers. Because what this line is pointing to isn't metaphorical, it's mechanical. It's a clue, a riddle that, when solved, reveals the deepest truth of existence, that you and the universe are not separate. You are reflections of the same thing. You are the mirror and what's being mirrored. You are the dreamer and the dream. To say the kingdom is within you is radical enough. That alone defies the teachings of nearly every externalized religious system, those that place heaven somewhere far away, beyond death, beyond reach, requiring obedience, repentance, or permission. But the Gnostics didn't see it that way. They weren't looking for paradise in the clouds. They understood that the realm of truth, what they called the kingdom, was a state of consciousness, not a destination. And they didn't say it's just inside you. They said it's outside of you as well. Why both? Why such a contradiction? Because it's not a contradiction. It's a revelation. The Gnostics were describing a universe that is holographic in nature, a reality where the whole is contained in every part. A mirror reflecting itself in infinite forms. When they said the kingdom is within and without, they weren't being poetic. They were describing the structure of consciousness itself. You don't live in the universe lives through you. Just as every cell in your body carries the code of the whole, every moment of your life reflects the totality of your consciousness. What you see outside is not independent from what's within, it's a projection, an echo, a response. Modern science is beginning to confirm this, reluctantly, quietly, but it's happening. Quantum physicists now speak of observer-dependent reality, how particles behave differently when they're being watched. This isn't mysticism, it's physics. The act of observation influences the outcome. Reality isn't fixed, it's responsive. And when you combine that with what mystics, seers, and energy workers have been saying for millennia, the picture becomes clearer. Your inner world shapes your outer world, not just emotionally or metaphorically, but quite literally. Every thought you think radiates energy. Every belief you carry shapes your perception, and perception is creation. You walk through life not as a passive receiver of reality, but as a projector. The lens through which you see determines what you see. If you carry shame, the world seems hostile. If you carry love, the world opens like a flower. The people you meet, the patterns that repeat, the doors that open or remain closed, they're not random. They're feedback. They are the outer expression of your inner vibration. That's what the Gnostics meant. The kingdom is within you, because that's where creation begins. That's where the divine spark rests, waiting to be remembered. But it's also outside of you, because the universe is the canvas on which your inner state is painted. The world is not happening to you, it is happening through you. Not because you're making it up with your mind, but because your consciousness is the foundation on which it all rests. This is why your inner healing changes everything. When you shift a core belief, the people in your life respond differently. When you elevate your frequency, new opportunities appear. The landscape changes, not because the world itself is different, but because you are. And this is where non-duality begins to make sense. The idea that there is no separation between you and the rest of existence. That the boundary between self and other, between within and without, is an illusion created by perception. It's the great cosmic trick, the veil that keeps the dream feeling real. But once you begin to wake up, once you feel the stillness of your being and recognize it as the same stillness behind the stars, everything softens, the edges dissolve. The kingdom is not in a future moment. It's not after death, it's not in a holy book or a sacred temple. It's right here. It's the breath you're breathing. It's the silence between these words. It's the energy behind your eyes. This is why manifestation teachings have become so powerful in the modern world. Though often diluted or misrepresented, their roots lie in the same truth the Gnostics held, that consciousness is the creator. Not from effort or force, but from resonance. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are, not as a punishment or reward, but as an energetic match. The outer world reflects your dominant frequency. So if you want to change your life, you don't chase the outside. You go inward. You don't beg the universe. You become the version of yourself who already lives in that reality. And when your vibration changes, your reflection must change with it. Think of it like a dream. When you shift your state within the dream shifts around you. You don't need to convince the dream to obey. You only need to recognize that you are the dreamer. This is the holographic nature of reality. This is the mirror-like quality of life. And this is what the Gnostics were trying to awaken in you. Not a doctrine, not a belief system, but a direct realization that the kingdom is not something you enter, it's something you recognize. But recognizing it isn't always easy. The world is filled with distractions. The mirror is often clouded. Trauma, conditioning, fear, they all distort the reflection. You might look outside and see only chaos, pain, or lack. But that doesn't mean the kingdom isn't there. It means your lens has been fogged by the past. And that's okay, because the lens can be cleared. The mirror can be polished. Every moment of mindfulness, every act of forgiveness, every breath taken in presence, these are acts of realignment. They return you to clarity. They bring you back to the kingdom that was never gone, only forgotten. The Gnostics weren't interested in giving you rules. They wanted to hand you a mirror. They wanted you to see that the divinity you've been searching for is already shining in your own being. And every tree, every star, every stranger on the street is a reflection of that same light. When you begin to live from this knowing, not just believe it, but feel it, everything changes. Life stops being a problem to solve. It becomes a canvas to explore, a symphony to harmonize with, a kingdom to remember. You don't have to wait. You don't have to earn it. The door has always been open. The only key you've ever needed is awareness. And the moment you pause, turn inward, and see the world not as separate, but as sacred, you'll understand. The kingdom is not coming, it's not lost, it's here, inside of you, outside of you, all around you. It always has been. If you have ever wondered what really happens when you die, you need to pause and consider something most people never dare to question. You have been taught that death is final, that it is the closing curtain, the end of your story. But what if the Gnostics were right all along? What if consciousness doesn't end, it simply relocates? You see, this is not just philosophy. It is a radical reframe of everything you believe about mortality. You have never actually witnessed death, not truly. You have seen bodies stop breathing, you have seen hearts stop beating, but you have never observed awareness itself vanish. What if that's because it doesn't vanish at all, it only shifts its frequency? Imagine you are listening to a radio. You are tuned into one station, the signal is clear, the music flows. Suddenly, the station cuts out. Static replaces the melody. To the casual listener, it feels like silence, as if the sound has disappeared. But you know the truth, the radio waves haven't ended. They are still there, flooding the air, broadcasting endlessly. It is just your receiver that lost connection. Now think about this carefully. What if your consciousness works the same way? Your brain and body are the receiver, tuned to a frequency of selfhood. When that receiver shuts down, the signal doesn't die, it relocates, instantly tuning into another channel already humming with life. Death, then, is not a wall, it is a frequency shift. The Gnostics compared this process to water flowing through a river delta. Picture an immense river, one body of water splitting into countless channels and streams. You may travel down one branch for years, thinking it is your only path. But what happens when that channel is blocked? Does the water disappear? Of course not. It simply redirects, flowing effortlessly into neighboring channels that were already there, waiting. Your consciousness, your divine spark, is like that water. When one pathway of life comes to a close, awareness does not dissolve. It simply streams into another course, seamlessly continuing its journey. Another way to understand this is through the lens of modern technology. Think of a piece of software installed on a computer. The hardware may grow old, break down, or stop functioning altogether. But the program itself does not depend on one single machine. You can install it onto another system. It opens, it runs, it continues just as before. Your memories, personality, and sense of identity are tied to the specific hardware of your brain and body. But the deeper awareness that notices these memories is the software, the true core program that is not destroyed when the machine shuts off. It simply relocates into another form, another operating system, already running in parallel. This is where the Gnostic insight becomes revolutionary. They insisted that what you call death is not an annihilation but a transfer, not the extinguishing of a flame but the moving of that flame to another candle. When your current body can no longer sustain the signal, your awareness shifts into a parallel timeline, a parallel self, one that has already been flowing beside you in the infinite river of existence. You don't leap forward into something foreign. You slide seamlessly into a version of you that was already alive, already breathing, already continuing the story from another angle. Pause for a moment and think about this. Every night when you fall into deep sleep, your conscious mind shuts off. You are gone to yourself. Hours vanish, then you awaken. To you it feels like continuity, as if you closed your eyes and then reopened them. But in truth, there was a gap, a discontinuity that your awareness simply doesn't record. Death is like this, a gap that the mind interprets as an ending, but to consciousness itself, there is no gap. Awareness simply continues, relocating without break. The seamlessness of this relocation is what makes it so difficult for you to notice. You do not remember being born, and you will not experience yourself dying. The transitions themselves are veiled, because they are not the experiences of awareness but the boundaries of the body. What you call you has been flowing all along, moving from one channel to another, without ever being touched by beginning or end. The only reason death feels final is because you identify so heavily with one receiver, one stream, one piece of hardware. But once you recognize that awareness itself is the real foundation, everything changes. Now let's take this deeper. Scientists studying quantum mechanics have already shown that the universe is structured in parallel possibilities. Every moment branches into countless outcomes. Infinite versions of reality run side by side. The Gnostics knew this in their own symbolic language. They described consciousness as flowing through multiple realms, with death as the moment when awareness shifts its tuning, accessing one of the countless branches already existing. You never cease, You never vanish. You simply continue in another version of yourself. Think of it this way. Imagine looking at an enormous tree. Each branch represents a different version of your life, each path a parallel you. Right now you are aware of one branch, the one your receiver is tuned to. When death occurs, the branch you were on stops, but your awareness doesn't fall off the tree. It simply moves into another branch, a living parallel that has been growing the entire time. To your awareness, the story feels unbroken. You open your eyes, and the journey continues. This is why near-death experiences so often describe vivid continuity. People who were clinically dead returned describing encounters with other versions of themselves, timelines they could have lived, paths not taken. They speak of feeling more alive in that state than in their bodies. How can this be, unless awareness itself was not tied to the body at all? The Gnostics anticipated this by teaching that the spark within you is indestructible. It cannot die, because it is not born. It simply shifts location, flowing from one channel to the next. If you truly take this to heart, it changes everything about how you live right now. You begin to understand that you are not racing against time, you are not walking toward an ending. You are experiencing a journey of awareness that is already eternal, already branching, already infinite. Death is not your enemy. It is merely a shift, a relocation, into another expression of you. The fear that has been woven into you by culture, religion, and science dissolves once you recognize this. They wanted you to believe death was the end, because a fearful mind is easy to control, but you now see the truth. You cannot end. You can only relocate. Think about how this reframes grief. When you lose someone you love, you believe they are gone forever. But in truth, their awareness has not ceased. They have relocated into another frequency, another channel. The receiver you once interacted with has broken, but the signal continues. You cannot tune into their new frequency with your current receiver, but that doesn't mean they no longer exist. They are as alive as you are right now, flowing in a parallel stream of the infinite delta. And so, the ultimate teaching of the Gnostics is not that you must prepare for an end, but that you must recognize a relocation. When you do, life itself takes on a different color. Fear becomes less important. Urgency fades. You begin to live more fully, because you realize that nothing essential can ever be taken from you. You are the awareness itself, indestructible, timeless, seamless. The body may fail, the brain may shut down, but you, the spark, will continue flowing, tuning, relocating endlessly in the great river of being. Imagine for a moment that what you call your life isn't the single fragile thread you think it is, but one of countless strands stretching across a vast tapestry of existence. Physicists like Hugh Everett once suggested that every choice you make branches into a new reality, not hypothetically, but literally. Max Tegmark expanded this into the multiverse concept, layer upon layer of possible worlds coexisting in parallel. Now, when you hear this, it might sound like abstract science or intellectual theory, yet it perfectly echoes something the Gnostics whispered centuries ago, that there are eons, streams of consciousness unfolding side by side, each one containing a version of you. What you call death may simply be the doorway to stepping into the next strand, a relocation of awareness rather than an end. If you've ever listened to the accounts of those who have gone through near-death experiences, you've probably noticed something peculiar. They rarely describe an abrupt ending. Instead, they speak of slipping into an alternate timeline, as if their awareness continued without pause, simply shifting its attention. Some even recall watching themselves in a hospital bed while simultaneously existing in a dimension of light and sound, only to return with the sense that both were equally real. This is more than a comforting fantasy. It aligns with the Gnostic idea that your soul doesn't dissolve but flows into adjacent channels of being. You are like water, poured from one container into another, always fluid, always continuous. Consider memory. In one life stream, you may lose the body, and with it the collection of personal memories tied to that form. But your awareness itself, the raw capacity to perceive, to know, to be, that doesn't transfer as much as it expands. It bridges seamlessly, leaving behind the storybook pages while carrying forward the reader. Think of it like software that runs across countless pieces of hardware. The hardware may change, but the program is still recognizable. Or, like a radio dial, twist it slightly and you pick up a new station, but the signal has always been in the air, waiting for your attention to align. This is why so many ancient traditions insisted that consciousness is indestructible. You may believe your life is a single linear journey from birth to death, but if Everett and Tegmark are right, your awareness is moving through a multiverse that branches at every decision. The Gnostics taught that within these branches, eons of reality exist like great rivers. Your soul streams flow alongside each other, touching, separating, and converging again. When you leave one current, you don't vanish into nothing. You simply find yourself carried by another stream. This idea challenges the deepest fear you've been conditioned to hold. You were told that death is an abrupt stop, a silence, a void. But what if the truth is that you never experience a void at all? From your perspective, awareness never ends. It only relocates. Think of a dream you woke up from. The dream world dissolved, but did your awareness? No, it shifted, opening its eyes in another layer of reality. Death is much the same, a smooth transition, an unnoticed handoff from one layer to the next. And if awareness can only ever relocate, then what you are can never be lost. The continuity is seamless because it was never dependent on your body to begin with. The body is like a lens, a temporary interface, through which awareness experiences a world. When the lens cracks, awareness doesn't end. It simply gazes through another lens. And sometimes, as near-death experiences suggest, you catch a glimpse of this shift in real time, seeing multiple layers overlap before the transition is complete. That glimpse is a reminder. The multiverse isn't just theoretical. It is personal, immediate, and directly tied to your existence. So what does this mean for you? It means that what you call your life is not the fragile singular path you feared it was. You are living in a continuum of timelines. Some you walk consciously, others you slip into without ever noticing the crossing. Memory, tied to form, may dissolve, but awareness, which is what you truly are, doesn't flicker out. It continues, branching, expanding, relocating, always watching. And when you begin to accept this, your fear of death collapses. Because once you understand that you were never in danger of ending, you can finally live without hesitation, knowing that awareness will always find its way home. When you sit quietly and reflect on your life, one of the strangest realizations is how little you actually remember of your beginnings. You have a handful of memories from early childhood, scattered images, fleeting feelings, fragments of experience. Yet the moment of your birth is entirely absent. You can look at photographs, hear stories from family, even imagine what it must have been like, but you cannot recall it from your own awareness. The same is true when you consider death. You may have watched loved ones pass, you may have grieved deeply, but you have never seen the instant when awareness itself extinguishes. That moment is always hidden, as if wrapped in a shroud. The Gnostics understood this mystery with astonishing clarity. They called it the veil, the thin partition that keeps you from carrying direct memory between lifetimes, between timelines, between the many channels of existence your consciousness flows through. Why is this veil there? If your awareness is eternal, if you are not bound by birth or death, why should you forget? To begin to understand, imagine switching from one computer to another. The document you are working on can be copied over. The essential information remains intact, but the browser history, saved passwords, and cached files do not transfer. They belong to the specific hardware of that machine. In the same way, your essential awareness moves seamlessly when the body can no longer sustain it, but the local memories stored in the brain do not come with you. They stay behind, tied to the neural pathways of that one receiver. The veil of forgetfulness is like the invisible firewall that prevents system-specific data from bleeding across operating systems. This may sound technical, but consider how natural it actually is. Every night, when you fall asleep, you enter a gap where memory does not register. You wake in the morning and say, "I slept well," or "I had a strange dream," but you cannot account for the countless hours that passed in between. Those hours were real, your body continued to breathe, your heart continued to beat, yet your conscious recollection of them is blank. The veil operates in much the same way during the transitions we call birth and death. Awareness itself continues, unbroken, but the conscious mind cannot carry those impressions forward. The Gnostics saw this not as a flaw but as a necessary design. Imagine trying to live your current life while vividly remembering every detail of dozens of past timelines. The grief of losses, the weight of mistakes, the countless alternative paths would press against you, overwhelming your capacity to act here and now. The veil protects you, allowing you to be fully immersed in this present channel of existence. It filters out the flood of parallel realities, so that you can focus on the particular lessons and experiences this life is meant to unfold. Another analogy is that of changing operating systems on a device. When you shift from one system to another, the basic application may look the same, but the background processes are entirely different. The awareness at your core is the same application. It continues to run, but the environment, the settings, the supporting files, are specific to the system you are currently in. When you transition between lives or timelines, the veil ensures that the awareness functions properly in its new context, without the interference of old code. This is why you do not recall your other lifetimes, even though they are happening right now, flowing in parallel alongside you. And yet, the Gnostics did not teach that this veil was absolute. They hinted, in their most esoteric writings, that it was possible to pierce it. Not through ordinary memory, not by trying to recall past events the way you remember yesterday's meal, but through gnosis, through direct experiential knowledge of consciousness itself. When you quiet the mind, when you disentangle from the stream of thoughts, you begin to sense the underlying awareness that has always been present. In those rare moments, the veil thins. You catch glimpses of a vastness beyond your personal story, flashes of familiarity with places and lives you cannot explain, a resonance with people you meet as if you had known them forever. These are not accidents. They are the cracks in the veil, reminders that you are far more than the role you are currently playing. Think of déjà vu, that uncanny sensation that you have lived this moment before, or the instant connection you sometimes feel with a stranger, as though your souls recognize each other across lifetimes. These are examples of awareness brushing against the edge of the veil. They are signals that beneath the surface of your conscious mind, there is continuity stretching far beyond what you remember. The Gnostics encouraged seekers to cultivate this recognition, not as a curiosity, but as a path toward liberation. For when you pierce the veil, you realize that you are not confined to one life, one body, one story. You are the timeless awareness in which all stories unfold. The veil also explains why spiritual practices across cultures have emphasized remembering who you truly are. Meditation, prayer, ritual, chanting, and altered states of consciousness were all methods to bypass the conditioned mind and touch the deeper continuity. When practitioners reported visions of past lives or encounters with other realms, they were not hallucinating in the ordinary sense. They were peering through the veil, experiencing the awareness that exists beyond the limits of the current receiver. Such experiences were often fleeting. The veil would close again as the ordinary mind reasserted itself. But they left behind a knowing that death is not the end. Consider how this changes your view of mortality. If you accept that the veil hides the transition, then the fear of death becomes less absolute. You understand that what you call death is simply the shutting down of one system while the essential program of awareness continues elsewhere. You may not remember the relocation, but you can trust in its continuity. The veil ensures that you begin each chapter with a fresh page, unburdened by the full weight of previous stories. At the same time, Gnosis offers you the chance to peek behind the curtain, to taste the continuity that words can barely describe. The veil of forgetfulness also teaches you humility. It reminds you that no matter how much you think you know, there is a vastness you cannot access with ordinary memory. The gaps in recollection are not failures, they are doorways into mystery. And mystery is not meant to be solved like a puzzle. It is meant to be entered, experienced, and honored. By accepting the veil, you learn to live this life fully, while holding the quiet assurance that you are part of an infinite continuum. So the next time you feel the pang of fear about death, or the confusion of not knowing what came before, remember this. The forgetting is not a punishment, it is a protection. The awareness that you are can never be lost. It flows like a river, relocates like a signal, installs like a program across systems. What changes is only the local memory, the files tied to the specific receiver. Beyond that, you remain whole, untouched, eternal. And with practice, with gnosis, you can pierce the veil enough to glimpse that truth. In those glimpses, the fear dissolves, and you begin to walk this life with the quiet power of one who knows that endings are only illusions. What if the resurrection was never meant to be some distant event at the end of time, but a living transformation available to you here and now, in the body you inhabit and in the breath you are taking at this very moment? The Gospel of Philip contains a line that turns conventional thinking upside down. It says, "If they do not receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing." At first glance, this statement seems almost shocking. You were taught to believe resurrection was about the afterlife, about a promise fulfilled after the body has collapsed into dust. But this teaching tells you something far more urgent, that resurrection is not a future occurrence but a present awakening. It is not about waiting to be raised someday. It is about discovering the dimension within you that has already risen, the part of your being that has never known birth and will never taste death. To receive resurrection while you live is to awaken from the trance of identification with the body and the story of the ego. It is to see that the self you cling to is not the essence of who you are. It is a mask, a temporary costume. The true resurrection is not about this mask being reanimated. It is about realizing that you were never limited to it in the first place. When you step into this realization, your relationship with death itself changes. You begin to understand that what ends is not you, it is only the vessel. Resurrection, in this context, is not about waiting for a divine intervention from outside. It is about receiving the revelation that you are already a timeless consciousness, housed temporarily in form. Imagine being asleep in a dark room. To resurrect is not to escape the room, nor to destroy it, but to wake up within it, to realize you were never bound by the dream you thought was your life. This is what the Gospel of Philip points to. It is not telling you to wait for a far-off promise. It is telling you that if you miss the opportunity to awaken, while you still have the breath of life in your body, you will remain caught in the cycles of unconsciousness. Death will come, and you will slide into it like a dreamer slipping into deeper sleep. But if you awaken now, while you breathe, while you love, while you experience the intensity of being human, then when death comes you do not fall into sleep. You carry awareness across the threshold. This is why spiritual traditions across the ages have emphasized practices that cultivate awareness in the midst of life. Meditation, contemplation, breathwork, prayer, fasting, silence, self-inquiry. Each of these practices is designed not to give you beliefs, but to train your consciousness to remain awake. If you sit in meditation and observe the rise and fall of thought without attaching to it, you are rehearsing for the final transition. You are practicing dying before you die. Every time you release an attachment, every time you let go of a false identity, every time you recognize the witness behind your thoughts, you are stepping closer to the resurrection that is available now. Mystics often spoke of a second birth, a moment when a human being is born not from the womb of the mother but from the womb of spirit. This second birth is the resurrection alive. You are no longer merely a body. You are no longer just a personality with memories and desires. You are awareness itself. Once you realize this, something extraordinary happens. You begin to live without fear. You walk through the world knowing that even if the body dissolves, the essence that you are cannot die. Death loses its sting not because you hope for a future salvation, but because you are experiencing your eternal nature in the present. Think of the accounts of those who have undergone near-death experiences. Many of them describe leaving the body but finding themselves more alive, more awake, more real than ever. Their consciousness did not dim, it intensified. What they discovered was a glimpse of the resurrection state. But you do not need to wait for a brush with physical death to touch this reality. The Gospel of Philip reminds you that it is your task to enter it now, before death. Because if you cannot find the thread of awareness that is unbroken in this life, how will you recognize it when the body falls away? Gnosis is this recognition, the knowing that your essence is eternal. It is not theoretical knowledge. It is not a set of doctrines or teachings to memorize. It is the activation of awareness that sees directly into the nature of reality. Gnosis means you wake up while still in the body, and by waking, you no longer live enslaved to fear. You can love more deeply because you know nothing can be taken from you. You can give more freely because you are rooted in abundance that does not run dry. You can let go of the illusions of the ego because you have touched what does not change. Resurrection while alive is not an abstract spiritual metaphor. It is the invitation to experience what it feels like to die before you die. Every moment you surrender a piece of the false self, every moment you step beyond the story of who you thought you were, you undergo a little resurrection. You rise into a wider consciousness, a field of presence that is no longer bound by time. When you cultivate this, death becomes not an enemy but a passage. You do not cling desperately to form, because you have already discovered what you are beyond form. The practices that prepare you for this are not complicated, they are as close as your breath. When you sit in silence and simply observe the rhythm of your inhalation and exhalation, you begin to notice that awareness remains constant through every cycle. This awareness does not belong to your thoughts or your body. It is prior to them. If you can root yourself in that awareness now, you are tasting resurrection. When you feel the waves of emotion rise and fall within you, and yet recognize that you are not the emotion, but the witness of it, you are practicing resurrection. Every small act of remembrance strengthens the capacity to carry awareness through the great transition. Receiving resurrection while alive means understanding that eternity is not somewhere else, it is here. You do not have to wait to step into it. You can practice it every day. When you walk mindfully, when you breathe consciously, when you love without clinging, you are embodying the resurrection state. The Gospel of Philip's warning is simple. Do not postpone. Do not assume that awakening will happen automatically after death. Consciousness must be awakened now. In this life, in this body, in this moment. Otherwise, death is only the continuation of sleep. This is the hidden meaning of resurrection. It is not about corpses rising from graves at the end of time. It is about you rising now, while your heart still beats, into the recognition that you were never bound by the grave to begin with. To awaken to this is to know the deathless. It is to walk as one who is free, and it is to embody gnosis, the direct knowledge that you are already eternal. This is the resurrection while alive, the secret hidden in plain sight, waiting for you to claim it before the moment passes. If you pause for a moment and look back across everything we have explored, a stunning realization begins to surface. The birth you once believed was your beginning was not the true start. The death you fear as an ending will never arrive in the way you imagine. You have never actually been born, and you will never truly die. What you call birth is simply awareness tuning into one particular channel of existence. What you call death is that same awareness shifting seamlessly into another. All along you have been identifying with the costume rather than the actor, with the temporary stage rather than the unchanging presence that plays upon it. The Gnostics understood this, and urged you to recognize the divine spark within, that constant witness who has been here before the first memory, and will remain long after the last heartbeat. Think of your life as a story unfolding on a screen. Characters come and go, scenes shift, plots twist and resolve. The screen itself never changes, it simply holds the play of images. In the same way, you are not the characters you have played, no matter how convincing they seem. You are the awareness that makes the story possible. That awareness cannot be burned, drowned, buried, or broken. It is what looks out through your eyes right now. The same awareness that looked through the eyes of a child, and will look through the eyes of countless forms to come. You have mistaken yourself for the shifting roles, when in truth you are the stage upon which they appear. This insight does not mean you should dismiss your human experience. In fact, it allows you to embrace it more fully. When you realize you cannot be lost, every moment becomes an opportunity rather than a burden. Challenges are seen not as punishments but as invitations to grow. Grief is softened by the understanding that no one you love can ever truly vanish. They have only relocated into a different expression of the same eternal field. Even your own mortality begins to lose its sting, because you know that what is essential cannot die. Death is not the closing of the book, it is the turning of the page. Imagine stepping through a doorway. From one side it appears like the end of a room, yet on the other side it is simply the beginning of another space. Death functions in exactly this way. You leave behind the walls you have grown familiar with, only to enter a wider expanse. The Gnostics insisted that the doorway of death is not a destination but a passage, a transition through which awareness continues its eternal movement. Once you understand this, the fear that has haunted humanity for millennia begins to dissolve. You stop clinging to the illusion that everything ends, and start living with the calm assurance that everything flows. If you let yourself feel into this, even for a moment, something inside you stirs. It is the recognition that you have always known this truth at a deeper level, beneath the noise of conditioning and fear. You sense that the presence within you is the same presence that has always been, that it has watched countless lifetimes pass like seasons and has never been diminished. This recognition is the heart of Gnosis, the direct knowing of what you are. No priest, no authority, no dogma can give it to you. It is already yours. The only question is whether you will claim it. And here lies the invitation. Begin to identify less with the shifting personality, the roles you play, the stories you tell about yourself, and more with the awareness that notices them. Every time you pause and ask, who is the one experiencing this thought? Who is the one watching this emotion rise and fall? You peel back a layer of illusion. You realize you are not the passing clouds of thought or the changing waves of feeling. You are the open sky, the still ocean in which they move. From this recognition comes freedom, because you no longer confuse the temporary with the eternal. When you see death through this lens, it transforms from a terror into a teacher. It reminds you that everything in form is transient, yet the essence behind form is indestructible. Death is the mirror that shows you what is real by stripping away what is not. Instead of running from it, you can embrace it as a sacred transition, a reminder that your true home is not in bodies or identities, but in the boundless field of consciousness itself. The Gnostics dared to say that whoever recognizes this truth will not taste death, because they understood that the one who knows is beyond the reach of endings. So what does this mean for you, right now, as you live this life? It means you can relax into your being. You do not have to chase immortality, because you already are it. You do not have to fear the unknown, because the awareness you are is the very light that illuminates all knowing. You can approach every relationship, every challenge, every breath with the certainty that nothing essential can ever be lost. This is not a promise of comfort, it is a promise of truth. Even when your body grows frail, even when memories fade, the awareness within you remains untouchable. This recognition brings with it a new way of living. Instead of clinging desperately to possessions, achievements, or identities, you can hold them lightly, knowing they are expressions of something greater. Instead of fearing change, you can welcome it as the natural flow of the eternal river you are part of. Instead of shrinking back from the mystery of death, you can walk toward it as you would walk through a familiar door, knowing that on the other side, you remain what you have always been. Awareness does not stop, it does not collapse into nothingness. It simply continues. The Gnostics risked everything to share this message, because they knew how liberating it island. Imagine living free of the terror that shadows so many lives. Imagine waking each day with the certainty that you cannot be extinguished. What would you dare to create? How much love would you allow yourself to give? How deeply would you trust life if you knew it could never take anything real away from you? This is the gift of Gnosis, not abstract philosophy, but the lived experience of freedom in the midst of a changing world. So, let this truth settle in you like a seed. Nurture it with reflection, water it with awareness. Let it grow into a tree whose roots run deeper than time. As you walk through your days, remind yourself again and again, I am not the passing story. I am the eternal awareness in which stories rise and fall. Death is not my enemy, it is my doorway. Consciousness is not something I have, it is what I am. And as you begin to embody this knowing, fear loosens its grip, clarity shines through, and life itself becomes luminous. This is what it means for you, to awaken to the reality that you were never born, and you will never die. To recognize that the truest part of you is beyond decay, beyond loss, beyond the reach of time. To live this life fully, not because you are clinging to it, but because you know you are infinite. And when the moment comes for you to step through that final doorway, you will not tremble. You will smile, because you will remember. You will remember that consciousness is your eternal home, and you have always been there.